It was a crisp morning in the foothills of northeastern Washington. The kind of September day when the sun rises late over the trees and the mist still clings to the tips of the pines. Keith Johnson, 84, moved slowly along the gravel path that led from his cabin to the woodshed. The air had a bite to it, and though his joints ached more than usual, he welcomed the stillness of the season. The cabin sat in a secluded part of Stevens County, a few miles from the nearest paved road. Keith had chosen this life deliberately. After losing his wife to cancer and retiring from the post office, he'd traded city noise for wilderness peace. He chopped his own wood, grew vegetables, and read by oil lamp when the power lines froze in the winter. He wasn't completely alone, though. For the past 13 years, Gita, a mixed-breed rescue dog with graying fur and alert brown eyes, had been his companion. He adopted her from a Spokane shelter the year after his wife passed. Gita was gentle but fiercely loyal. She never strayed far from Keith's side and slept at the foot of his bed, even when arthritis made the climb difficult. That morning, Keith intended only to split a few logs for the stove. But as he stepped off the path, a root hidden beneath fallen leaves caught the toe of his boot. He fell hard, his right leg twisting awkwardly beneath him. The snap was sharp and unmistakable. Keith cried out, once, then again. Pain shot from his thigh up through his ribs. He tried to sit up, but the world swam. "Gita," he called, through clenched teeth. She was already there, whining, nuzzling his shoulder, pacing in small circles like she understood something was wrong, but didn't know how to fix it. "Go, girl, go get help," he rasped. Of course, it was a fantasy. He wasn't sure if she even understood what help meant. The nearest neighbor lived over a mile away, and the county road was farther still. Keith had no cell phone. He never saw the point. He checked his watch. It was 8:43 a.m. He lay there, the cold seeping into his bones. Minutes passed, then an hour. Gita hadn't left. She licked his hand and settled beside him. Every so often, she would rise, whine, and look toward the distant road. Then something changed. Just before noon, Gita stood up and barked sharply. Once, twice. Then she took off, not into the woods, but down the dirt path in the direction of the road. Keith tried to shout after her, but his voice cracked into silence. "Be safe," he whispered. On that same stretch of road, Deputy Lisa Moreno with the Stevens County Sheriff's Office was conducting a routine patrol. It was a low-traffic day, and she almost missed the shape darting through the brush alongside her cruiser. A dog. At first, she thought it was a coyote. Then she saw the faded blue collar and the limp in its step. The dog barked frantically at her vehicle, darting forward, then circling back. Lisa pulled over. "What is it, girl?" she said aloud, unsure why she felt the sudden urge to speak like the dog could answer. The dog, Gita, barked again, then trotted back toward the woods, pausing every few feet to look back. Lisa hesitated for only a moment. She radioed in her position and followed. Up ahead, Keith lay still. His breath had grown shallow, and his lips had taken on a faint blue tinge. He wasn't sure if he was dreaming when he heard footsteps in the leaves, fast, purposeful. "Sir?" A woman's voice. "Sir, can you hear me?" He blinked. "Dog," he croaked. "I know," Lisa said, already kneeling beside him. "You've got a good one." Deputy Lisa Moreno quickly assessed Keith's condition. He was conscious, but barely. His skin was pale, his pulse faint, and his speech slurred. The signs of shock were setting in, and fast. "Sir, you've broken your leg, likely your femur," she said gently, trying to keep him awake. "I've called for backup. EMS is on the way." Keith nodded weakly, his gaze drifting toward the trees. She went. Gita. She knew. Lisa looked over her shoulder. The dog was there, panting hard, her coat matted with burrs and dirt. She didn't come closer, only stood nearby, eyes locked on Keith like a sentinel. "Looks like she ran for you," Lisa said. "Smart girl." She retrieved a mylar blanket from her cruiser and wrapped it around Keith's torso. "We'll get you warm. Just stay with me, okay?" Keith tried to smile, but the muscles in his face barely moved. The minutes ticked by, and the stillness of the forest was broken only by Lisa's voice, speaking in calm, even tones. She told him about her own dog, a Labrador mix named Pepper. She told him about her dad, who had broken his hip in Idaho the previous year and was walking again. She needed Keith to stay with her. She needed his eyes open. By the time the EMS unit arrived, nearly 40 minutes had passed. "Probable femoral fracture," Lisa told them. "Decreased responsiveness. Suspected hypothermia." The paramedics worked quickly. One of them, a younger man named Brian, set up a warming IV, while another stabilized Keith's leg. Gita stood just beyond the tree line, tense and quiet. "You think the dog led her to him?" one paramedic asked. "No question about it," Lisa said. "She flagged me down, then led me right here." They loaded Keith onto a stretcher and hoisted him into the ambulance. Gita whined. Lisa crouched down beside her. "You want to come with him?" She opened the back of her cruiser. Gita jumped in without hesitation. The emergency room at Providence Sacred Heart Medical Center in Spokane was busy that afternoon. Keith was rushed in for evaluation, X-rays, and eventually surgery. The fracture was clean but severe, a high-impact spiral break in the femur. The orthopedic surgeon on call, Dr. Megan Riley, later told the family that without medical intervention, Keith might have gone into full shock and died before nightfall. When Lisa arrived at the hospital, still in uniform, she carried a blanket and a metal bowl of water for Gita. Hospital policy didn't allow dogs inside, but after she explained the circumstances, and a nurse recognized her from a prior call, they made an exception. Gita sat in the waiting area, refusing to lie down, ears perked every time a door opened. News traveled quickly in small counties. By the next morning, Keith's story had made the rounds through the sheriff's office, the paramedic station, and the local newspaper. A reporter from the Colville Chronicle showed up at the hospital to get the details. It wasn't long before local TV stations picked it up. "Rescue dog rescues her owner." One headline read, "Elderly man saved by loyal companion," said another. The interviews were brief. Keith, groggy from medication, simply said, "She saved my life. Gita saved me. I don't know how she knew, but she did." Back at the cabin, Lisa returned the following day to check on things. She refilled Gita's food bin, secured the woodpile, and locked the shed. She also took photos of the path, the spot where Keith had fallen, and the faint paw prints leading from the scene toward the road. Later, she submitted a brief report to the department. It read in part, "Dog demonstrated clear intentional behavior consistent with seeking assistance. Without intervention, subject likely would have succumbed to shock or hypothermia. Canine response played critical role in life-saving rescue." Gita spent 4 days at the hospital before Keith was released into short-term rehab. She slept beside his hospital bed the night before discharge, curled at his feet. And when the time came to return to the cabin, she walked beside the wheelchair, eyes scanning the woods, as if still watching for danger. The drive back to the cabin was slow. The paramedics had given Keith a transport chair, and Lisa insisted on escorting them all the way home in her cruiser, just in case. The closer they got to the cabin, the quieter Keith became. He looked out the window, watching the blur of pine trees and gravel melt into memory. "I didn't think I'd see this place again," he murmured. Gita sat beside him in the back seat, her chin resting on his knee. The front porch still held the dented coffee mug he dropped that morning. A single crow sat on the railing, staring at the returning car like it had been waiting. Lisa helped Keith back inside, easing him into the old rocker by the fireplace. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and dry pine. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. "I'll check in later this week," Lisa said. "But you need to let someone know you're out here, even if it's just once a day." Keith nodded. "I will." She looked down at Gita. "You take care of him, okay?" The dog wagged her tail once. The following weeks were a slow return to rhythm. Keith couldn't walk without assistance, and his right leg was locked in a rigid brace. But he insisted on doing what he could. He boiled his own water, read the same paperback novel 5 times, rewrote a letter to his daughter in Oregon that he'd never mailed. And Gita never left his side. She'd grown quieter, not subdued, just observant. At night, she'd lie close to the bed, rising every hour to sniff Keith's leg or check the door. One night, Keith awoke to the soft sound of whining. He sat up, wincing, and saw Gita staring at the window. The trees outside rustled in a way that didn't feel like wind. He listened. Nothing. Still, he trusted her instincts. Always had. He reached for the phone Lisa had made him install, a prepaid flip model with 4 contacts and big, blocky buttons. He called her. Lisa answered on the second ring. "Deputy Moreno." "It's Keith," he whispered. "Might be nothing, but Gita's acting odd. She's looking at the woods." "I'm on my way." By the time Lisa arrived 20 minutes later, Keith had drifted back to sleep, but Gita was still on alert. Nose pressed to the crack of the front door, her tail stiff. Lisa did a full sweep of the property. She found fresh boot prints near the edge of the woods. Human, not Keith's. She didn't tell him immediately, just stayed an extra hour, chatting softly, letting him fall back to sleep. Then she left a note on the fridge. "Tracks near the perimeter. Could be hunters. Keep doors locked. Will patrol more often. Lisa." 2 days later, Keith received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single torn page from an old Bible. The passage underlined was Isaiah 41, verse 10. "Fear not, for I am with you." Keith read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. He didn't mention it to Lisa, but Gita seemed to know. That night she slept not by the bed, but at the door. The days grew colder. Autumn was folding into early winter. Leaves browned and fell, blanketing the path where Keith had lain that day. Local news picked the story back up around Thanksgiving. A segment aired on regional television featuring an interview with Lisa and archival footage from the rescue. "She wasn't just a pet," Lisa told the reporter. "She acted with purpose. She made a decision to save someone. That's not just instinct. That's loyalty." They showed a photograph of Keith and Gita taken outside the hospital. He was smiling, hand on her back. The anchor ended the segment with a line that stuck with many viewers. "Sometimes heroes don't wear badges. Sometimes they wear collars." The snow came early that year. By the first week of December, a thick frost covered the evergreens, and the air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Keith, bundled in layers of flannel and a wool blanket, spent his days by the window with Gita curled at his feet. His daughter, Emily, had offered to move him down to Oregon. He appreciated the gesture, truly, but he had declined. "This is my home," he'd said. "I've got everything I need right here." And Gita made him feel safe. They settled into a quiet rhythm, morning tea, afternoon naps, the occasional slow shuffle outside with his cane. His body healed more slowly now, but Gita seemed more patient than ever, waiting at the door, helping steady him when he moved from the rocker to the table. One morning, Keith was reading aloud from an old field journal he'd kept in the 90s when Gita suddenly pricked her ears and stood up. He stopped reading. "You hear something, girl?" She was at the window before he could rise, tail stiff, her body low. He followed her line of sight and saw it too. Just for a second, a dark figure at the edge of the woods. It moved quickly behind a tree. Keith's heart thudded. He stood slowly, leaning hard on the cane, and went to the door. Gita growled, a low, rare sound he hadn't heard in years. "Easy," he whispered, more to himself than her. He opened the door, stepped onto the porch, and called out, "Hello?" Nothing, just wind through branches. A crow cawed overhead and flapped away. He stayed there a moment longer, then stepped back inside and locked the door. This time he did call Lisa. She came the same day. After checking on Keith and walking the property again, she returned with a trail camera, motion-activated, infrared, military grade. She placed it at the edge of the woods and pointed it toward the clearing. "I want to know who's out here," she said, "and why." She didn't want to alarm him, but the pattern was troubling. Tracks, the torn Bible page. Now this. Lisa had worked patrol for 9 years. She knew when to trust her gut, and she trusted Gita's too. That night, Keith slept with a flashlight beside his pillow and the trail cam app open on the small tablet Lisa had given him. Just after midnight, the tablet pinged. He sat up slowly. Gita was already at attention. On the screen, a blurry figure, human, moving between the trees. The figure paused in the center of the frame, half shrouded in shadow. No face, just a tall silhouette in a long coat. Then it vanished. Keith's mouth went dry. He forwarded the image to Lisa and typed just 2 words, "It's real." She arrived again the next morning with backup, another deputy and a canine named Tank. They searched the perimeter and found additional tracks. Large boot prints, consistent with the first set, but now more brazen, closer to the house. And worse, signs that someone had been watching. Twigs arranged in piles, a spot where the snow had been tamped down, like someone had stood for hours without moving. "This isn't random," Lisa said. "Someone's watching you." Keith didn't say much, but his hand rested on Gita's back the whole time. Later that week, Lisa returned with a new plan. "I want you out of here, just for a few days. Let us run surveillance. I'll have deputies rotate shifts, monitor the trail cams, see if we can spot movement." Keith hesitated. He hated the idea of abandoning his home, but when he looked at Gita and the way she stayed pressed to the door, ears always alert, he knew. He packed a bag. The cabin would not be empty. Lisa set up lights with motion sensors, additional trail cams, and even left a decoy jacket by the porch. "We want them to think you're still here," she explained. As Keith rode away in the back of her cruiser, Gita sat beside him, silent but watchful. He didn't look back. The motel Lisa arranged for Keith wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, close to the sheriff's substation. He stayed in room 12, a ground floor unit that looked out over a frozen parking lot. The staff left him be, and the heater buzzed all day like a restless fly. Gita adjusted quickly, curling up beside his bed each night like she had back at the cabin. But Keith didn't sleep well. His thoughts kept returning to the woods, to the man or whoever it was, standing near his home, watching, waiting. Why? He kept going back to the Bible page, the verse, the deliberate way it had been left. Isaiah 41:10. Fear not, for I am with you. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it wasn't comfort either. It felt like a message. At the sheriff's office, Lisa and her team combed through the trail cam footage day and night. They cataloged several false alarms, raccoons, deer, once even a bear. But on the third night after Keith left the cabin, the camera captured something else. The same silhouette, this time closer, standing directly beneath the trail cam, staring into it. The timestamp read 3:42 a.m. There was no face visible, just that long coat. But the posture was defiant, almost challenging. Lisa printed out the still and pinned it to the evidence board. "Who are you?" she muttered. Later that afternoon, Keith sat across from her at the station, sipping weak coffee. "That man," he said, after Lisa showed him the image. "He's been there more than once, hasn't he?" Lisa nodded. "I have a theory," he said slowly. "You're not going to like it. Try me." Keith leaned back. "About 25 years ago, I worked a route outside Spokane. I used to deliver to this house, edge of town. An old man lived there. Every month, I'd leave him his pension checks. Nothing unusual. Until one day, he stopped answering. Mail piled up. I called it in. Turned out the guy had died weeks earlier." Lisa waited. "But there was a kid there, his grandson, lived with him. Maybe 15 at the time. Angry, real quiet. He thought we'd stolen the old man's money. Said we let him die." She raised her brows. "You think it's him?" Keith shrugged. "I don't know, but he looked at me like I owed him something. That stare, I never forgot it." Lisa made a note. "Name? I don't remember. Something with an R." The following day, Lisa ran a local background search. She narrowed it down to 3 possible names and began digging. One name stood out. Raymond Lusk, arrested in 2010 for trespassing. Again in 2017 for stalking a nurse in Colville. No convictions, no fixed address. Known to camp along state forest boundaries. His last known sighting? Less than 10 miles from Keith's cabin. That night, Lisa returned to the cabin with 2 deputies. The woods were silent, almost too silent. The snow reflected their flashlights in wide arcs of cold white. When they reached the spot where the man had stood beneath the trail cam, they found a new set of prints. But this time, something else. A pile of firewood had been stacked neatly by the back door, and pinned to the woodpile, beneath a small stone, was a torn piece of notepaper. Written in tight, slanted letters, "I used to watch him. Now he watches me." Lisa folded the paper carefully and slid it into an evidence bag. "This isn't just some stranger," she said. "He's been here before." Keith was right. Whoever this man was, he didn't come for shelter or food. He came for Keith. And the dog, the one thing standing between them, might be the only reason things hadn't gone further. Lisa didn't sleep that night. She stayed at the station long after the deputies had gone home, staring at the blurry trail cam photo and the strange message pinned to the woodpile. "I used to watch him. Now he watches me." What did that mean? And why return to the cabin just to stack wood? This wasn't random. It was deliberate, personal. Back at the motel, Keith stirred awake around 3 o'clock a.m. He wasn't sure what had roused him, a sound maybe, or just the familiar pressure in his chest that came from too many memories all pressing down at once. Gita was already up, her body stiff, ears forward. A second later came the knock. 3 quiet taps. Not at the door. At the window. Keith froze. Gita growled, low and rumbling, like something ancient rising from her chest. He reached for the flashlight and turned it on. The beam sliced through the darkness, catching nothing but frost on the glass. Then, movement. A blur at the edge of the lot. He reached for the phone and dialed Lisa's private line. When she arrived 5 minutes later, there were no tracks, no signs of entry. Just a faint boot print beneath the window and a cold feeling in the air. Lisa walked the perimeter 3 times. "Could be coincidence," she said, but didn't sound convinced. Keith just looked at her. "I think he's following me." Lisa nodded. "You're not going back to the cabin yet," she said. 2 days later, they set a trap. A deputy dressed in one of Keith's flannel shirts limped along the porch and entered the cabin like an old man returning from the hospital. Inside, cameras had been mounted. Audio equipment was tucked into the rafters. A thermal drone patrolled the air above the tree line. The real Keith, meanwhile, stayed in an unmarked cruiser 2 miles down the road, with Gita beside him, watching the cabin through a portable feed. Hours passed. Then, movement. A figure stepped out of the woods at twilight, slow and deliberate. He moved around the cabin once, then again, as if waiting. Then, the man stepped onto the porch. He didn't knock. He simply sat in Keith's chair and looked out toward the woods. 10 seconds, 20. Then a whisper caught on audio. "You think you can hide?" That was enough. Deputies moved in. "Sheriff's Department, don't move!" The man bolted into the trees, fast for someone with a heavy coat and worn boots. But not faster than a canine unit. Tank, the black German shepherd on patrol that night, took him down 50 yards in. His name was Raymond Lusk. No weapons, no bag, no ID, just layers of old clothes, a cracked leather Bible, and a notebook filled with disturbing sketches, cabins, trees, eyes. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he barely spoke at all. Just one sentence, repeated 3 times in holding. He should have died first. Lisa didn't show Keith the notebook. Some things he didn't need to see. But she did tell him the man wouldn't be coming back. He'd be held under psychiatric evaluation, likely for months. Still, that night, Keith didn't sleep, and neither did Gita. She sat at the door, head high, eyes never blinking. Only when the sun came up did she relax, slowly lying down beside Keith's chair, finally exhaling. A week later, Keith returned home. The snow had melted in patches, revealing wet earth and pine needles. Winter wasn't over, but something in the air had shifted, a release of tension, like the forest itself had exhaled. Gita stepped out of the cruiser first. Her nose went high, her eyes scanned the trees, and her body relaxed only when she reached the porch. She circled once, then lay down at the top step, just like old times. Keith followed slowly. His legs still ached with every step, but the cane steadied him. He paused at the doorway. "I never thought I'd stand here again," he whispered. Lisa smiled. "Well, you've got a guard dog better than most alarm systems." He chuckled. "She's more than a dog. She's my heart." Inside, everything was just as he left it. The kettle, the folded quilt, the paperbacks on the table. Only now, there were extra locks on the doors, new motion sensors on the windows, and a stronger cell signal, thanks to the tower Lisa's department pushed through the county council. Safety had returned, or something close to it. But something else had taken root too: respect. The story of Gita's rescue and her unwavering loyalty had spread beyond Stevens County. A local journalist published a piece that was picked up by national news. Then came the letters. Hundreds of them. Veterans who'd lost their dogs, seniors who lived alone in rural cabins, children who'd grown up with shelter pets. They all wrote to Keith, or rather, to Gita. Some sent gifts, treats, hand-knit blankets, dog tags engraved with hero. One woman from Nebraska mailed a handmade collar with the words stitched in gold thread, "My Guardian." Keith read each letter aloud. Gita would sit quietly, occasionally wagging her tail like she understood. The American Humane Association called next. They wanted to honor Gita with the Hero Dog of the Year award. There would be a ceremony in Seattle. Press, photos, a red carpet. Keith smiled, touched, but declined. "She doesn't need a stage," he said. "She just needs her woods, her home." Instead, they sent a plaque. It read, "For extraordinary bravery and unwavering loyalty, Gita. You are the reason he lived to tell the tale." Keith hung it beside the fireplace. Winter passed. By spring, Keith was walking short distances without the cane. The bruises on his body had faded, but the ones in his memory would take longer. Still, he smiled more now. He spoke with Lisa every few days, and he never ignored a sound in the woods. Every night, before bed, he would say the same thing to Gita. "Thank you, girl, for not giving up on me." And she would curl beside his chair, close her eyes and rest, as if her job for now was done. One morning, Keith woke early. The sun hadn't quite reached the treetops. The sky was pink with promise. He opened the door and stepped outside with his coffee. Gita padded out beside him and sat at his feet. Together, they watched the world wake up. The birds sang. The air was still. It was in that moment Keith realized something simple and profound. He had been saved, not just from the cold, not just from the man in the woods, but from something deeper. Loneliness, fear, hopelessness. All of it had been held at bay by the heartbeat of a dog who refused to leave his side. Months passed, and spring softened the hard edges of winter. Keith began keeping a journal again. Not like before, not just notes about weather or what wood needed chopping, but real thoughts, memories, gratitude. He called it simply the Gita Pages. It began with a single line. "The dog that saved my life also gave it back to me." He wrote about the fall, the cold, the silence in the woods. He wrote about the sound of her paws as she ran down the road, how she looked back at him before disappearing through the trees. Like she knew what she had to do. And he wrote about waking up days later in a hospital room, her head resting on his blanket. Always watching, always there. One day, Lisa visited unannounced. She brought fresh coffee and a small package wrapped in brown paper. Keith opened it slowly. Inside was a custom-made leather collar, dark mahogany, stitched with the words, "My light in the forest." He turned it over in his hands. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with emotion. Lisa sat across from him and watched Gita sleeping by the hearth. "I've been in law enforcement 12 years, she said quietly, "seen all kinds of things, but I've never seen a dog do what she did. Not like that. Not with that kind of purpose." Keith nodded. "Neither have I." That summer, Gita turned 14. She was slower now. The stiffness in her hips was more noticeable, and the stairs took her longer. But her spirit, that fire in her, never dimmed. Neighbors she'd never met came to visit. Some brought flowers, others photographs of their own dogs. They didn't come to see Keith. They came to meet the hero with paws. Late one evening, as cicadas buzzed in the trees and the sky burned orange, Keith sat on the porch and looked at Gita beside him. He reached down, stroked her fur, and said, "I don't know how many more seasons we'll get, but I'll be grateful for every one." She blinked up at him, then rested her head on his boot. And that was the heart of it. This wasn't a story about a rescue. It was about devotion. About how when everything else fails, the phones, the roads, the distance between people, something pure can still rise up and save you. Even if it walks on 4 legs. Even if it doesn't speak a word. Epilogue. Today, if you visit the rural edge of Stevens County, you might see a little wooden sign near the tree line. It doesn't say much, just 4 words carved into cedar. Home of Gita, hero. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll spot an old man with silver hair sitting beside an aging dog, watching the woods, alive, together, because of one moment, because of one choice, because one dog refused to give up. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach others who need them. Leave a comment below and let us know, has a pet ever changed your life? Thank you for listening.